What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors meets his match in the most unexpected way? When Benedict Cumberbatch, a man revered for his razor-sharp intellect, his eloquent charm, and his almost surgical control over every word he speaks, finds himself across from a host who seems intent on dismantling him piece by piece, what unfolds is not your typical celebrity interview gone wrong. It's something far more intense, far more personal, a masterclass in tension, pride, and public unraveling, all caught on live television for the world to see. It began as any ordinary media appearance. Benedict was in the middle of a demanding press tour for his latest project, a haunting psychological thriller that had already begun stirring Oscar chatter. For weeks he had been moving from studio to studio, charming every interviewer, disarming even the toughest critics with his mix of humility and wit. The show The View was just another stop on the long carousel of promotion. Or so he thought. That morning, the New York air outside was crisp and the city pulsed with its usual energy. Inside the ABC studio, everything was set, the lighting soft but precise, the audience murmuring in anticipation, and the hosts preparing their note cards. Benedict, dressed impeccably in a tailored navy suit that accentuated his poised demeanor, greeted everyone with his usual calm civility. There was Whoopi Goldberg, radiating her trademark warmth, sunny host and polite and composed as ever, and Joy Behar, whose grin, even before the cameras rolled, carried something sharp beneath the surface. The red light blinked on. Applause filled the room. Whoopi leaned in with her easy smile. "Benedict, welcome back to The View," she said, her tone light and friendly. "It's always such a pleasure to have you here." "Thank you, Whoopi," Benedict replied, his voice as smooth as velvet, touched with that unmistakable British cadence. "Always wonderful to be back." The first few minutes unfolded just as expected. Discussions about his new film, his approach to method acting, his fascination with complex characters. The chemistry between guest and host seemed relaxed, effortless. But beneath the polished surface, something was brewing, something only Joy Behar seemed aware of. And then, the shift came. "So, Benedict," Joy began, her tone deceptively casual, "I have to ask about something that's been bothering me for quite some time now." The room seemed to tilt ever so slightly. Even through the practiced professionalism of live television, the sudden change in her energy was palpable. "Of course, Joy," Benedict replied with that trademark composure that had served him so well through years of press scrutiny. "What's on your mind?" Joy leaned forward in her chair, elbows on the desk, eyes locked on him. "It's this whole British superiority complex thing," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "You come over here to America, take our roles, our opportunities, and then act like you're doing us some kind of favor. Don't you think that's a little presumptuous?" The audience gasped softly. Even the camera operator seemed to hesitate, uncertain whether to zoom in or pull away. The tension was almost tangible, like static before a storm. Benedict's face didn't flinch. But for those who knew him, the small tightening around his eyes, the deliberate stillness in his posture, it was clear that the hit had landed. "I'm sorry, Joy," he said evenly, his tone calm but firm. "I'm not sure I follow. I've always been deeply grateful for the opportunities I've had in American cinema. I certainly don't consider myself superior to anyone." Joy let out a short, sharp laugh, one that echoed off the studio walls, uncomfortable and cutting. "Oh, please, Benedict. The accent, the Oxford education, the way you choose every word like it's a performance, it's all part of the act, isn't it? You know exactly what you're doing." For a moment, the air went still. Whoopi shifted in her seat, glancing at the producers just off camera. Sunny lowered her gaze, clearly sensing the awkwardness of what was unfolding. The audience, caught between fascination and discomfort, didn't make a sound. Benedict exhaled slowly, his eyes never leaving Joy's. "If I give careful thought to my words, it's only because I respect the people I'm speaking to," he replied softly. But there was steel beneath the calm. If that comes across as calculated, perhaps that says more about how we interpret sincerity these days. Joy's expression flickered, but she wasn't done. "Come on, Benedict. You can't honestly believe people buy the whole humble British gentleman thing. You've made a career out of playing geniuses, detectives, doctors, kings, and now you sit here pretending you're just a regular guy." For the first time, Benedict leaned forward. The lights glinted off his eyes, not angry but resolute. "I play characters, Joy," he said. "That's what actors do. But when I'm here, I'm not playing anyone. I'm answering your questions as myself. If you find that hard to believe, perhaps that's not my problem to fix." A murmur ran through the crowd. Whoopi subtly tried to step in. All right, let's not make this a BBC versus ABC moment," she joked half-heartedly. "We're all friends here." But the moment couldn't be smoothed over so easily. The energy had shifted beyond repair. Joy leaned back, crossing her arms, but her smirk had softened, ever so slightly, as if realizing she might have gone too far. Benedict, meanwhile, sat poised, his silence now commanding the entire studio. The seconds ticked by, heavy and unbroken. Then Benedict spoke again, not defensively, but with a quiet power that silenced the room. "I've worked with American directors, writers, and crews who have taught me more than I could ever repay. Talent doesn't belong to one nation. It belongs to those who dedicate themselves to their craft. If that challenges you, then perhaps it's time we stop drawing lines where creativity should connect us." The audience erupted in applause, hesitant at first, then growing louder, until even Whoopi was clapping. Joy managed a polite nod, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of discomfort. As the cameras cut to commercial, Benedict offered a small, courteous smile, then leaned back in his chair. The storm had passed, but the silence that followed carried the weight of what had just happened. By the time the clip hit social media, the internet was ablaze. Some praised Benedict for his grace under fire. Others accused Joy of going too far. But one thing was certain. This wasn't just another celebrity interview. It was a raw, unfiltered collision between ego and composure, a moment that revealed, perhaps more truth than anyone had intended, and in the end, as the world replayed that 5-minute exchange again and again, one thought lingered in every viewer's mind. Not even the most eloquent actor can fully script what happens when the cameras are live and the masks begin to slip. The tension in the studio was no longer subtle. It was electric. You could almost hear the collective intake of breath from the audience, the quiet shifting of bodies in their seats as the atmosphere grew thick with discomfort. What had started as a simple promotional interview had turned into something far more charged. A verbal dual broadcast to millions. Whoopi Goldberg, sensing the direction things were heading, tried to step in before it spiraled further. "Joy, maybe we should focus on Benedict's new film," she suggested, her tone light but firm, the practiced diplomacy of someone who'd seen plenty of on-air conflicts. But Joy Behar wasn't backing down. She had locked onto her target, and there was a glint in her eyes that said she wasn't going to let this go until she'd made her point. Whatever that point was. "No, Whoopi," Joy interrupted, her voice rising with a sharp edge. "I think this is important. I think our audience deserves to know what they're really getting when they pay their hard-earned money to see a Benedict Cumberbatch movie." The studio's air conditioning hummed faintly, filling the silence that followed. Benedict's jaw tightened, just slightly but enough for the cameras to catch. His composure was legendary, but even legends had limits. "Joy," he said evenly, "I respect your right to your opinion, but I'm here to discuss my work, not to defend my nationality or my education." Joy leaned forward, eyes narrowing like a cat preparing to pounce. "There it is again," she snapped. That tone, that little pause before you speak, like you're carefully choosing words that us simple Americans might be able to understand. For a moment, you could almost feel the collective cringe ripple through the studio. The other hosts exchanged uneasy glances. Sonny Hostin, ever the voice of calm reason, tried to intervene. "Joy," she said softly, "I think Benedict has always been very respectful in his interviews. I've never gotten the sense that he..." "Respectful?" Joy interrupted, her voice rising as she laughed sharply. "Is it respectful to come into our country and play our most beloved characters? Sherlock Holmes, when fine, that's British, we'll give you that. But Alan Turing, Stephen Hawking, and now I hear you're being considered for American historical figures too. Where does it end?" For the first time, Benedict's carefully composed mask cracked. A flicker of irritation, fleeting but unmistakable, crossed his features. "Joy," he began, his tone still controlled but carrying an unmistakable edge. "With all due respect, acting is about inhabiting characters, regardless of nationality. Some of the greatest American actors have portrayed British figures beautifully. It's about talent and suitability for the role, not the color of one's passport. Passport color, Joy repeated, seizing on the phrase like a hawk spotting movement in tall grass. Now you're making jokes about nationality? You think this is funny? Benedict's gaze hardened. That's not what I said, and I think you know that, he replied, his voice lowering slightly, the kind of tone that carried warning more effectively than shouting ever could. But Joy either didn't catch it or chose to ignore it. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms, wearing the satisfied expression of someone who believed they'd landed a decisive blow. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking, Benedict. You British actors come over here with your fancy training and your posh accents, and Hollywood just falls over itself to hire you. Meanwhile, plenty of perfectly capable American actors are struggling to find work. Joy, that's simply not accurate, Benedict replied, his patience beginning to fray. The film industry is global now. American actors work extensively in British productions, and vice versa. It's not about one country taking from another. It's about collaboration, not competition. Joy gave a laugh, sharp and mocking. Collaboration, she repeated, drawing out the word as if it tasted bitter. Is that what you call it when you swoop in and take the role of Doctor Strange? A Marvel superhero that could have gone to any number of talented American actors? Benedict's eyes flashed dangerously now. The restraint in his voice stretched to its breaking point. I auditioned for that role like everyone else, Joy. I wasn't handed anything. Oh, but you were, though, weren't you? She shot back, her smirk widening. The British accent, the intellectual charm, the whole package. It's what Hollywood eats up. You think some struggling actor from Kansas would have even gotten in the door for that audition? Whoopi sighed audibly, muttering something under her breath that the microphones mercifully didn't pick up. The audience didn't know whether to laugh, gasp, or just stay silent. The energy in the room had shifted from uncomfortable to combustible. Benedict sat forward now, elbows on the table, his voice calm but laced with authority. Joy, he said, I understand you're trying to make a point about representation, but this isn't about Britain versus America. It's about artistry. The goal of cinema, of storytelling, is to connect people, not divide them. When I take on a role, I do so because I believe I can honor that story, not because I'm trying to take something from anyone. Joy rolled her eyes slightly. That's a lovely speech, Benedict. Very noble. But you do realize how it sounds to everyday Americans watching at home? People who feel like the deck's already stacked against them. For the first time, Benedict hesitated. Not because he didn't have an answer, but because he knew whatever he said next would echo far beyond that studio. The cameras were still rolling. Millions were watching. He took a breath. I think, he began slowly, that storytelling has no borders. The moment we start assigning creativity to one flag or another, we lose what art is meant to do, to bring us together. I don't take roles because I'm British. I take them because they challenge me, because they mean something. If that offends you, then I suppose the real question isn't about nationality. It's about why empathy makes us uncomfortable. For a moment, even Joy seemed at a loss for words. The silence that followed was heavy, not awkward but powerful. Sunny gave a small nod, clearly impressed. That, she said quietly, was very well put. The audience broke into applause, hesitant at first but quickly growing into something warm and genuine. Whoopi smiled, grateful for the reprieve. Well, she said with a hint of humor, I think we can all agree Benedict just gave us one of the best answers we've ever had on this show. Joy forced a tight smile, her earlier confidence dimming ever so slightly. Sure, she muttered. Let's call it collaboration. Benedict didn't respond. He simply offered a polite smile, that small, unshakable symbol of dignity, and leaned back in his chair. But his eyes told a different story. Beneath the composure was a man who had just walked through fire and come out unburned. When the segment ended and the cameras cut away, the studio erupted, not in chaos but in the quiet murmurs of people who knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Within hours, clips of the exchange flooded the internet, sparking endless debate. Some praised Joy for her boldness, others defended Benedict's composure and grace. But one thing everyone agreed on, it was one of the most unforgettable, unfiltered moments in live television history. And as the dust settled, one truth remained clear. Sometimes, the sharpest battles aren't fought with weapons, they're fought with words. pride, and the unshakable power of restraint. By this point, the studio felt less like a talk show and more like an arena. The bright stage lights, the silent cameras, the audience holding their breath, everything pulsed with a charged, unspoken question. How far was this going to go? Joy Behar leaned back in her chair, a gleam in her eyes that could only be described as delight. She was enjoying this, perhaps more than she should have. Every jab, every calculated remark seemed to fuel her. You were handed that accent, that education, that whole package that makes American casting directors weak in the knees, she said, her tone half teasing, half accusatory. Tell me, Benedict, do you practice that accent, or does it just come naturally when you're trying to impress people? The words hung in the air like smoke. The laughter she might have expected never came. Even the live audience sensed that the exchange had crossed an invisible line. The hum of the cameras seemed louder than before, the air heavier. Benedict's hands, which had been resting loosely on the table, slowly curled into fists. The faintest tremor ran through his jaw before he spoke, his voice dropping several degrees colder. Joy, he said, his tone now deliberate and dangerous, I'm going to give you one opportunity, just one, to clarify whether you're genuinely interested in having a conversation about the film industry, or whether you're simply trying to create conflict for the sake of your ratings. A murmur rippled through the audience. This wasn't acting. This was real. Joy's eyes lit up like a predator who had just cornered her prey. Oh, now we're getting somewhere, she said, smiling wide for the camera. Look at that, ladies and gentlemen. The mask is starting to slip. This is the real Benedict Cumberbatch. Not so charming when someone challenges him, is he? Whoopi Goldberg visibly tensed beside her. Maybe we should take a quick break, she interjected, her tone almost pleading. But Joy wasn't about to relinquish control. She waved Whoopi off with a flick of her hand. No, she said, her grin tightening. I want to hear what Benedict has to say. Come on, Benedict. Show us that famous wit. Give us one of those clever little comebacks you're so known for. For a long, unbearable moment, Benedict just looked at her. His piercing green eyes locked on hers, unblinking. The silence stretched thick and uncomfortable, until even the camera operator instinctively took a step back, as though proximity to the moment might somehow be dangerous. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but it was the kind of calm that carried warning, the calm before thunder. Joy, he began slowly. In my career, I've had the privilege of working with some truly remarkable people. Directors who push boundaries, writers who challenge perceptions, actors who bring truth to every moment they perform. And I've also encountered people who mistake cruelty for honesty, who confuse aggression with journalism. He paused, his gaze never leaving hers. I'm beginning to understand which category you fall into. For the first time, Joy's smile faltered. It was fleeting, just a heartbeat, but enough for the audience to see it. The power dynamic in the room shifted ever so slightly. She recovered quickly, forcing her trademark grin back into place. There we go, she said, her voice sharp but slightly unsteady. That's the arrogance I was talking about. You can't help yourself, can you, Benedict? You just have to prove that you're smarter than everyone else in the room. Benedict leaned forward slightly, his expression sharpening, his composure unshaken. Joy, he said, you seem to be operating under the assumption that intelligence is something to be ashamed of. That articulation, thoughtfulness, and or somehow character flaws. I find that profoundly sad. The word sad landed like a hammer. Sad? Joy repeated, her voice cracking like a whip. What's sad is watching you sit there and act like you're above this conversation, above this show and above us. I never said any such thing, Benedict replied, his tone rising slightly now, his confidence filling the space her aggression had claimed. But I do believe I'm above personal attacks disguised as journalism. The air practically vibrated. Joy slammed her palm down on the table so hard that everyone jumped. Even Whoopi flinched. The sound echoed through the studio. Personal attacks? She demanded. I'm asking legitimate questions about privilege and opportunity in Hollywood. Benedict didn't move. He simply looked at her, and for a brief moment it felt as if time itself had frozen. The silence that followed was unbearable, an ocean of tension swirling between them. Finally, Benedict spoke again, his voice a low, controlled burn. There's a difference, he said softly, between asking questions and assigning blame, between exploring inequality and weaponizing it for entertainment. What you're doing isn't journalism, Joy. It's provocation. Joy blinked, visibly thrown off balance for the first time. Provocation? She repeated. Yes, Benedict said, leaning forward now. You're not asking because you want an answer. You're asking because you want a reaction. You want to see me lose control to fit your narrative of the pretentious British actor who thinks he's above everyone. But here's the problem. I don't play roles off screen. The words struck like a quiet thunderclap. Whoopi looked toward the control booth, mouthing something that resembled cut to break. But the producers, equally mesmerized, seemed frozen in place. Joy's smirk returned, but weaker this time. So now you're psychoanalyzing me? She said, half laughing. Benedict tilted his head slightly, his gaze unwavering. No, he said. I'm just observing. The audience erupted, half in awkward laughter, half in applause. Some cheered his poise. Others winced, unsure whether to admire or fear his composure. Joy forced another laugh, but the sparkle had gone from her eyes. She looked down at her notes, and a rare crack in her armor. Whoopi seized the moment. All right, she said quickly, clapping her hands once. Let's take that break now, folks. We'll be right back. The studio lights dimmed slightly as the show cut to commercial, but even as the applause sign blinked on, the tension didn't fade. Crew members whispered to each other. The host sat in uneasy silence. Benedict adjusted his cufflinks, the faintest hint of a smile ghosting across his lips. Not smug, but resolute. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't lost his cool. But everyone in that room knew. He had just taken control of the narrative. By the time the clip hit the internet that afternoon, it was already trending worldwide. Social media was ablaze, their Cumberbatch vs. Behar flooded timelines, clips dissected frame by frame. Some hailed Benedict as the embodiment of restraint and intellect under fire. Others accused Joy of ambushing her guest for spectacle. But regardless of which side people took, one thing was certain. That exchange would be studied, replayed, and debated for years. It wasn't just television. It was a masterclass in composure. The moment the line between performance and authenticity disappeared, and the world saw who Benedict Cumberbatch really was. And as one producer later said off camera, shaking his head in disbelief, you could feel it, like watching two worlds collide. And Benedict didn't just survive it. He owned it.